Hello guys, welcome back to my channel. I just hopped off my intake for my new therapy that I just started. Yes, I started therapy again. Did I have a relapse? Did I struggle with food again more than I did before? No, actually not. But as I told you guys before, when I first started recovery, I actually fell into a very deep depression. All those feelings came up that I didn't really feel for 10 years during my eating disorder, because in the end, even if it doesn't feel like it, an eating disorder is a huge coping mechanism to cope with unwanted emotions, with trauma, with fear, with anxiety, all those kind of things. Speaking of anxiety, as you guys also know, I actually have a lot of anxiety, which I also didn't realize even before my eating disorder, because I never really learned how to feel into my body and how to feel my emotions. So when I was anxious during my childhood and even during my teenage years, I always thought my heart was weird. I was like, oh, my heart is racing and I have a lot of stomach issues. I always have my belly always hurts. Turns out it was anxiety back then, and it is still anxiety now. We're working on it. It's getting a lot better. But, with the anxiety coming up, with like certain triggers coming up over the last couple of weeks, with a new relationship that is amazing, but that also triggers a lot of like abandonment issues and a lot of fear of being left again by a male person, I actually decided to work with a therapist again. So the big difference for me is when I was in my eating disorder and looked for therapists and like went from one therapist to another therapist and also worked with a great therapist for a couple of years, I was always hoping to make them heal me basically from my eating disorder. The two main reasons to look for therapy was first that my family was like, oh, you're sick, you need therapy, you need help. So I kind of just didn't want to hear that anymore and went to therapy just, to have peace. And also because I was hoping to find someone who would point out the one trauma that led to me having an eating disorder, and then we can resolve it and then I'm going to heal. Of course, that's not how it works. As we all know, eating disorder recovery is a lot of like habit changing, creating new healthy habits, also like working on your past and on your traumas, of course, but you can't think yourself out of an eating disorder and you can't talk yourself out of an eating disorder. So for 5 years straight, I would sit in my therapist's office, talk and talk and talk, and would change nothing at all. So now that I'm recovered and that I'm in a healthy body, that I'm able to feel my emotions again, some things came up again that I wasn't able to work on during my recovery. So I decided to look for a therapist again, and it's actually the first time in my life that I started therapy when I'm not in a crisis. Because before, when I went inpatient, when I reached out to a therapist, it was always some kind of crisis going on. I'm actually in a pretty good place at the moment. I feel very, very happy with my relationship. I'm very grateful to live in LA. I'm very grateful for my friends. I feel, mostly good with my body. I love working out. Like, I'm pretty happy with my life. But I also know that there are certain things that I want to work on in order to improve my relationships, in order to, eventually become a good mother that worked through her stuff. And so it was the first time for me that I sought a therapist without being in a crisis. And I actually just mentioned it to her. And I feel like she completely understood. I feel like we're gonna, be able to work together pretty well. I have a very good feeling about it. But she was like, oh, so where are you coming from? What's your current problem? Why did you decide to have therapy? And I explained it to her, and she was like, oh, that's actually a great approach, because like most of my patients reach out when they're in a crisis, and then it's oftentimes not too late, but it's actually helpful to start working on your issues even when it doesn't feel super urgent. Another thing that changed pretty much is, as I mentioned earlier, I was always kind of like looking through my childhood, through my past, analyzing certain behaviors I had back then, analyzing my relationships with my parents, with my step-parents, with my siblings, with, everyone, and just like talking and talking and talking about my childhood, which helped me a lot because I needed to understand where certain things are coming from. I needed to understand that certain things were not okay, that my feelings were valid, even if if certain people in my life made me feel invalid or made me feel like my feelings were invalidated. But I now want to work in the present and not in the past. Of course, it's more than okay to talk about your past or to understand where a certain issue is coming from. But like overall, and I just mentioned it to her as well, overall, I want to start working more in the present. So if I'm anxious about something, if something triggers me, I want to learn how to, you know, how to cope better in that situation, how to communicate better, how to, work through my anxiety, how to work on my self esteem, like all these kind of things. So that's actually a big shift for me because, as I said before, I was always like going through my childhood, always like looking for some kind of external validation as well, like also external validation for my eating disorder. And I feel like I'm in a completely different place now. And I actually don't think that this means that this therapy will have a worse outcome. Actually, I think the opposite. I think it might be super helpful because now that I'm in a good and healthy or healthier space, I will be able to, process my emotions in a different way, to understand myself and also the people around me in a different way. It's more than fine to seek out for help if you need help, if you're in a crisis. There's nothing wrong with it. Again, I did it for so many years. But it's also, great to look for, some more help for a therapist, for a coach, whoever you want to work with when you're not like directly in a crisis because you're still valid and you're still worth it. And a good therapist will never take you down and be like, oh, you're not sick enough. You're not in a crisis. I won't work with you. That's not the case. Even though I was afraid for it for such a long time, but this is not going to be the case. So I would love to encourage all of you to, you know, get help if you need it, but also to validate your feelings enough to see that if you feel like you want to talk to a therapist, it's more than fine, even if you're doing well. Also, and that's something I'm gonna release another video about soon, if you're in a bigger body, because that's also something people struggle with a lot, especially if they are in recovery from an eating disorder and they are in a bigger body now. You are so worth it. Your body, your struggles, your shape, your weight does not define if you can have therapy or not. There is no way a good therapy will turn you down or will be like, oh, you weigh too much. I'm not gonna work with you. There might be some therapists out there that actually have that approach, but I'm telling you right now, these are not the kind of people you want to work with. Trust me. So I hope that helped a little bit. I can't wait to create more content for you guys. Can't wait to release my books, and I will see you in the next one.